Shall we start?
Perfect.
Bex, yeah, I think we're ready to go. Our panelists are all here. Susanna's here.
Okay, let me start.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Songkranok from NASDA, Thailand. Today, I just want to a brief introduction about our ASEAN BCG Researcher Development Program. Some of you already know, but just let me just briefly for a new one that who just joining us for today. This is a two phase of the program. Now we are on the first phase, which is the online courses that will offer the opportunities for ASEAN researchers to improve their essential researcher skills. In phase 2, there will be 30 researchers selected from phase 1 to participate on 5-day workshop will be held in Bangkok, Thailand. In the second phase, we already decided to be held, to be organized in 10 to 14 of July this year. The application that we would like to, this is the phase 2, we open for early to mid-career postdoctoral researchers from ASEAN who have to have at least 3 years in research experience working at the academic and research institute in ASEAN and have an excellent in English. The selection process, the interesting applicant have to submit their CV with a short exposé explaining on how the their research connect with the BCG economy model. And we request to have a recommendation letter from their university or research institute that explain and have a mention about the career path of the applicant if they already passed the second phase. One more thing that I would like to highlight is that the applicant who want to apply for the phase 2 have to attend our online phase for 70%, which is seven courses out of 9. The announcement for the phase 2 will be announced around early of June. Right now, we are on session 3, scientific writing and science communication skill. Today is the 6th lecture on journal writing. May I hand the screen back to Dr. Susani, who will be our moderator for today. Dr. Susani is the regional coordinator of Eurosex Worldwide. Dr. Susani.
Thank you so much, and welcome to all the participants. It's over 200 now, and I think we're looking forward to a really great session. And the session is called Journal Writing, but really we're not talking about the journal where you jot down your own little notes of what happened to you during the day, but it's really how do you get your research results published in a scientific journal. And we have with us 3 excellent speakers today. And instead of just reading out their CVs, I thought I'll ask each of them a question. Firstly, joining us all the way from Sweden, where spring hopefully is springing very soon, is Victoria Babit. Victoria is the Director of Researcher Development and Outreach at Taylor & Francis. Now, Victoria, my quick question for you is, what do you find most rewarding about the role that you have?
Oh, boy. I think it's just the ability to interact with so many fantastic researchers globally and to understand what they struggle with and to be able to support them with their publishing goals. So it's just that kind of exchange, actually. It's hearing from them and being able to support them.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. And Victoria is going to start our session in a minute, and she is going to give us really hands-on advice on how you should approach this publishing journey. And as she said, the interaction with you is really what makes this a good session. So already take your notepads out so you can jot down your questions. Joining us from Singapore is Dr. Rick Chi-Wai Lee. He is the General Manager at World Scientific Publishing. Now, Rick, you've been in the business for a very long time. What keeps you excited about the publishing world?
I think one of the main key things that keep me engaged and very interested is I find that although publishing is has long history, but for the past 20 years, a lot of new changes, and every day you learn something new, and new techniques are coming out, new way of doing business are coming out, and really keep me very excited, and to find out what's happening, and then to be able to even make some changes as well.
Thank you, Rick. And we are looking forward to hearing your insight into what's new in the publishing world and what implications that has for researchers when they're trying to get their research results out in the world. And our third speaker today is Barry Clark. Barry is the Managing Director of Taylor & Francis Asia Pacific. And Barry, just like Rick, you've also been in the publishing world for a very long time. What do you think is the most important change that we're seeing? And what is the message for you for young researchers, how they're coping with these changes?
Well, thank you, Susanna. Thank you for the invitation. I think the most important change, certainly since I've lived in Singapore, which is over 30 years, is the diversity of voices that are now taking part in global research. It's so important that the world respects each other, and more voices from especially Asia Pacific is something that I've been focused on for the 30 years I've lived in Singapore. So yes, much more stronger voices from this region, ASEAN in particular, but across Asia Pacific.
Thank you so much. So you can see, excellent panel lined up for you. And our first speaker is Victoria, who will give us a really hands-on session. And as I said, please, everybody, when you have questions, we'll have Q&A at the end. Use the chat to write down your question. To make it easier for me, please begin your question by really typing question so I can see it and I don't overlook it. Victoria, the floor is yours, please.
Great. Thanks so much. My slides up. Are you able to see my slides? Yeah.
Perfect.
Fantastic. All right. Well, greetings, everyone, from Stockholm, Sweden, and many thanks to ASEAN BCG Network for inviting me to present today. It's a pleasure to be here. And today we're going to look at how you can prepare your manuscript and make strategic choices that will increase the likelihood of being published. And this is going to be a bit of an interactive session today, and I'll show you how in just a moment. So I'd like to begin by just taking a look at the top 10 reasons for rejection. Over the years, we've asked our editors to tell us the top reasons for rejection, and they tend to be quite similar, irrespective of discipline. They might use slightly different language, but basically this is the types of things that they see. So first of all, sent to the wrong journal. Then we have not a true journal article, not following the journal author guidelines, poor regard for the journal conventions or academic writing in general, poor style, grammar, punctuation, or English, no contribution, not properly contextualized, poor theoretical framework, messy presentation or sloppy proofreading, or libelous, unethical, rude, or lacks objectivity. So today we're going to look at all of these reasons, not necessarily in order, and provide some guidance on what you can do to avoid making these mistakes. And in exploring the reasons for rejections, we're going to be focusing on 3 areas of the process. So choosing the appropriate place to publish, preparing your manuscript, and then navigating the peer review process. Today, I'm going to be using examples from Taylor & Francis, but most of the processes and recommendations would apply to most journals and publishers out there. So we're going to jump in and have some interactivity to get everyone warmed up here. So in a separate window on your computer, or if you have a phone or an iPad on hand, I'd like you to open up Mentimeter. You'll see the address up there on the slide, and then there's a code that you'll need to put in, 77200132. Let me just pop out of this presentation. We'll put up the Mentimeter. Whoops. There we go. So the question I want to know is, what is the greatest challenge you face as a researcher? And this is free text, so it's a Wordle. Just type in 1 or 2 words in there. It usually takes a second for it to populate. Here we go, funding. Yes, funding and procurement. Publications, yeah. Starting, yeah, I agree with that one. Timeline, resources, visibility, high APC, lack of communication, visibility, access to equipment. It always gets hard to read these as we're moving around. Mentorship, yeah, that's a key thing. Ethics, basic skills, language barrier, yeah, that's a key thing. I've been hearing some really interesting things with the AI technology, and hopefully in the future that's not going to be as much of an issue. Wow, funding seems to be the main thing, and then we've got mentoring and procurement, methodology, collaboration, yeah. Fantastic. Writing skills, and it sounds like there's a lot of support for that with this program. Innovative ideas, grants, difficult to collaborate. I think that that is an issue oftentimes. Be good to do a session on that, actually. Great. All right. So we're seeing a lot of different ideas coming up here, and I can share the findings afterwards if you'd like, but I think it's a good idea to jump back into the presentation. So I'm going to do that. Great. So a lot of challenges that researchers have, and that those are all going to be global challenges, especially I think the funding issue. That's something that all researchers really struggle with. But one of the challenges that authors have that I wanted to start with, especially those that are just starting out, is communicating their research findings in a manner that's accessible and in line with how most researchers in their field present their research. And that came up a little bit on that slide, the writing and the communication. And this brings us to the second reason articles are rejected. As I said, I'm not necessarily going to go in order. So we're starting with the second reason, and that is peer reviewers and editors determine that the article in question is not a true journal article. So what might they mean by that? Well, it could be that what has been submitted to the journal is more similar to a condensed thesis or a book chapter. So it's covering too many different points. It might be unfocused or lacking the structure of a journal article. Or it could be that it's too journalistic. So perhaps more of an example of public scholarship. Basically, the piece of writing is not a journal research article in terms of either the structure or language, or it could be a combination of both. So before you begin investigating possible journal options for your work, it's essential that you spend time understanding your current project and the audience you're hoping to reach. And throughout your career, you're likely to be involved in many different types of research, which of course will lead you to produce a variety of content. And typically people tend to focus on the research article, but over time you may publish review articles, whether that's a literature or a theory review or a systematic review. You might be interested in publishing a position piece or a case study. And there's a lot of new article types that are emerging now too with the rise of open research practices. Sometimes your work will be written for specialists in your field, but you may also want to engage with public scholarship, so writing for the general public. And sometimes it will be for a very local audience, and sometimes you're hoping to reach an international audience. It's also important to understand what's expected of you, what the particular requirements are in your current position. Are you required to publish research articles? Or is the expectation that you'll write a book and then turn various chapters into articles in the coming years? Is there the expectation that you'll collaborate with your advisor and be a co-author on a paper? And if so, what does that actually mean? Once you've determined your objectives and understand what's required of you, then you can begin considering where to publish. And when you begin investigating the appropriate place to publish, remember, you're joining an ongoing conversation in your field. So you want to make sure that you're contributing thoughtfully to that conversation. Now, the number one reason articles are rejected is because they were sent to the wrong journal. So choosing a journal that is not a good fit for your work can slow down the publishing process significantly. So it's important to take this part of the process seriously and be thoughtful about your journal choice. It can be difficult to know where to begin when you're looking for potential journals to publish in, especially when you're just starting out. Obviously, the first step is to read a lot, to get a sense of the published research and the journal options in your particular field. So when you come across an article that's similar to your work, make a note of what journal published it. This way, you'll begin to build awareness of the different journals in your area that publish research that's similar to yours. And some of your peers and mentors may have publishing experience, and they can share their insights as well. Talk to your network of colleagues, those who know your work, and ask for journal recommendations. And if they publish in those journals, ask them about their experience. See if they have any advice to offer about the process. Academics and researchers are assessed using different criteria depending on the institution and sometimes the particular field. So again, take time to understand how you will be assessed in terms of your publications. So do you need to publish a certain number of articles each year? Are there particular journals that you need to publish in? For example, is there a ranking system for journals where you might receive more points for publishing in one journal as opposed to another? Do you need to publish your work open access? The answers to these questions are likely going to be different for each one of you. Whatever criteria you need to meet, make sure to take it into consideration when selecting a journal to submit your work to. Now, apart from your own experience and the feedback you receive from colleagues and the different criteria set by your institution, there are other methods of identifying journals to publish in. So at Taylor & Francis, we have what we call a journal suggester tool that will help you identify potential journals to publish your work in. And many publishers have similar tools. And I noticed that the Web of Science even has a tool that you can use. And basically what you do with ours is you cut and paste your abstract into that white field and then click on revealed suggested journals. And then the system will produce a list of journals it believes are a good fit for your work based on the language you used in your abstract. So that's why it's really important to be specific with your language when you're writing your abstracts. Now, the list won't be perfect, but it's a good starting point. And once you've identified some journals that might be a good fit for your work, then you need to carefully read the aims and scope statements to see if it is truly a good fit for your work. So aims and scope statements are designed to give librarians and students and researchers and potential authors a clear understanding of what the journal is about and the type of research that they're interested in publishing. And here we have an example from a journal, the American Association of Geographers, the AAG, that is what we call a generalist journal. So this journal covers broad subject matter across the discipline of geography. So human geography, GIS, physical geography, the works. However, they do highlight some requirements. So first of all, they want research that is innovative. They also want research that is of high quality and that is making a novel contribution to the literature. And then lastly, they highlight the different types of content that they publish, the different article types. Here's another example from geography. Apologies, I'm a geographer, so I'm naturally drawn to these titles. And this journal has this slightly smaller scope. So it's social and cultural geography. So here they want research that makes a strong contribution to critical geography, which is a particular type of theoretical geographic research. Next, they would also like research that confronts topical issues and fosters debate. So they're using very specific language there. Then they're also interested in an international authorship. And again, they highlight the different types of content they're interested in receiving, so the different article types. Lastly, another example from geography with a particular geographic and topical focus, Eurasian geography and economics. So this journal is interested in receiving research about particular geographic regions that focuses on particular research areas. And in addition, they want authors to clearly articulate their novel contributions to the literature regarding the region or theory, and they welcome comparative studies. And lastly, they encourage papers that integrate studies of Eurasian geography and economics into the wider disciplinary debates. So as you can see, all of these journals have the word geography in the titles, but they're interested in publishing very different types of research. So again, it's important that you take the time to carefully read the aims and scope statements before you submit your paper to a journal. Now, along with the aims and scope statements, it's a good idea to look at what's been published in the journal in the past, say, 3 to 5 years and ask yourself, does my research fit this journal? And if you find research that's similar to yours, you should consider referencing it. Remember, you're joining an ongoing conversation in your field and in that particular journal. Lastly, review the editorial board of the journal, because this will give you a sense of what type of research they're interested in publishing. Editorial boards are built to reflect the ambitions of a journal. So if they're interested in publishing research in a certain area, they'll try and appoint someone to the board that is a specialist in that particular area to act as an ambassador for the journal and to help with peer review, because they will know all the key figures in that research area. And the same is true with geography. If a journal is interested in receiving more research from a specific country or region, they'll try to appoint someone based there to help increase submissions of articles from institutions in that region. We would recommend that you choose a few journals that you feel would be a good fit for your work and create a list. You can rank them from your #1 choice onward. And when it's time to submit your article for peer review, start with your #1 choice. And if for some reason that journal's not interested in publishing your work, move on to your #2 choice, and so on and so forth until your article is accepted. It's all about having a clear strategy at the beginning of the process and acting on it. When selecting a journal, you may be interested in, or in some cases, required to publish your work open access. And I'm going to quickly go over some of the key elements of open access for those of you who might be unfamiliar with it. So there are 2 essential elements to open access. One is about making content freely available to anyone in the world in a digital format. And the second is about making content reusable by a third party after publication. But before we dig into that, I'd like to go back to Mentimeter and hear from you again. Oops. Let's see. Jumping to Mentimeter here. We're going to go to the next slide. And for those of you who have joined late, we're at Mentimeter. You'll see the address at the top of the slide here, www.menti.com. And then you need to use this code 77200132. So here I'm just interested in why you might publish your work open access, whether it's a requirement by your institution, a requirement by your funder. It might be that you believe in making your work as accessible as possible, or you have no interest in publishing open access. So right now it seems to be that the belief in making work as accessible as possible is taking the lead. But we do have some requirements here for by institutions and by funders, and a few people that aren't interested. Great. Yeah, I think that's giving us a good picture. Not too many funders requiring it here. Great. Wonderful. As said, I'll share these findings afterwards with people if they're interested. But back to the presentation. Wonderful. Well, just digging into open access a bit, you're likely to hear many terms when discussing open access. So some people will refer to green open access or platinum or diamond. Sometimes you even hear bronze open access. But today I'm just going to discuss gold open access. So gold open access essentially entails making the PDF or that final version of record freely available online. And there are 2 ways in which an author can publish open access with most publishers, either in a fully open access journal or in what we call a hybrid journal. So fully open access journals publish all of their content open access. And these journals aren't funded by subscriptions. Instead, most charge what's called an APC, or an article publishing charge. However, keep in mind, many journals are funded by societies or institutions, and in that case, either the author doesn't have to pay, or maybe they pay a reduced fee. But all information about APC fees should be very clearly detailed on the journal website, usually under the instructions for authors. The other option for publishing open access is hybrid open access. And this is when an author chooses to publish open access in a journal that is subscription funded, and much of the content is not freely accessible unless you or perhaps your institution has a subscription to that journal. And these journals charge APCs to cover the publication cost for the open access article. But again, many institutions are signing deals with publishers, what are called transformative or read and publish deals, where the institution covers all the APC costs for hybrid journals as well. So before you submit, if you're interested in publishing your work open access in a hybrid journal, talk to your librarian and see what options you have, because they may have some deals in place with different publishers. Now, the second element of open access that I mentioned is how your work can be used by others after publication. So if you publish your work open access, you'll be asked to choose a Creative Commons license, which describes how people can use your work in the future. Some journals don't give you a choice on which type of license you can use, so it is important that you investigate prior to submission if you have any concerns. Sorry, it sounds like someone has their mic on, so make sure that your mics are muted just so everyone can hear. Thanks. So on the slide, you'll see some of the typical licenses that you're likely to come across. And keep in mind, this is kind of a mix and match system here. So the most common license for fully open access journals is CC BY. And this license allows authors to use your work in any way they choose, as long as they clearly attribute the authorship and original publication. So they can't claim the work for their own. They have to cite your work. The next type of license is CC BY NC, and NC stands for non-commercial. So here an author can use your work in any manner, but they can't profit from it. So for instance, they wouldn't be able to include your article in a book that they would subsequently charge money for if you would use that license. And then we have CC BY ND. And here an author cannot change your work in any way. They must use it in the original form. For instance, this would mean that they couldn't translate your work and publish a translation if you would use that license. And then lastly, I'm just including CC BY SA, because this means that when people use your work, that they need to attach the same license as you originally did. And this is, of course, important to be aware of when using work of others. So as I said, this is a mix and match option. So you can actually have a CC, BY, NC, ND, SA license attached to an article. So yeah, that's the type of licensing that you'll have instead of copyright if you publish open access. Now, unfortunately, in recent years, we have seen the rise of fraudulent activity on the part of organizations claiming to provide services to researchers. And many, if not all of you, will be aware of predatory publishers. These entities present themselves as legitimate publishers or editors or journals, and they will inundate your inbox with invitations to publish your articles with them. However, often the journal in question will be well outside of your research area. So you can take a look at the slide in the upper right-hand corner. This is actually an email my partner received recently, and it's from a medical journal interested in publishing his research, which focuses on financial economics. So one would assume not really a great fit for a medical journal. Predatory publishers have many characteristics in common. Their websites contain incorrect or misleading information. For instance, they will copy established journal names and website designs, but they'll have some small differences, such as a slight difference in the journal name. The editorial boards will feature names of well-established researchers who never agreed to be on the board. And they'll also promise very fast peer review and publishing time, so promising publishing within a week. And for those of you that have published before, you know that's unrealistic. Peer review takes a long time, and there's always revisions and this sort of thing. Crucially, the peer review process often doesn't happen, or it's fabricated. And then lastly, they often have confusing or unclear information about publication fees. And that's why I said all that information should be clearly detailed on a journal website. You shouldn't have to dig for it. Now, the other trend that I wanted to highlight that we're seeing is predatory services for authors. And these entities set up professional-looking websites offering a number of services similar to legitimate publishing service companies, such as language editing or scientific editing. And they'll also offer to format your paper in the style of the journal you'd like to submit to, and then they offer to take care of the submission process for you, which sounds great, less work for you. However, what we found is the websites look very professional, but if you look closer, the language doesn't quite make sense, such as the text example on this example in the lower right-hand corner. It's almost right, but there's just a few oddities with the language there. We've also been contacted by a number of authors who were told that their papers had been submitted to one of our journals by these services, and that they had participated in what they thought was a legitimate peer review process, and their paper had been accepted for publication, but they can't find it on the website. However, we had never seen these papers. The editors of the journals had never received the papers, never put them through peer review, and had never accepted them for publication. Unfortunately, the authors had received fake but very official looking communication from what they thought was the editor and our production department. So they would have the signature of the editors. They would use the same format as the type of letters we send out from our publication department, same kind of codes we use, all that type of thing. The main point I want to make here is always submit your article yourself. Never let anyone else do it for you unless it's one of your co-authors. Now, there are some great resources out there that I'd like to point you to when you're trying to make sound decisions about where you would like to publish if you're interested in publishing open access. The first one is Think, Check, Submit. And this is a cross-industry initiative that you might have heard about. It helps researchers make informed choices and to choose trusted journals. And what they've done is they've created kind of a toolkit that's comprised of questions so that you can kind of use those questions to investigate a research journal site and make sure that they're ticking all the boxes. DOAJ is a database for open access journals. It's also a great resource. The journals in this database have been screened to ensure that they're legitimate. However, like many databases, there is an assessment period. So new journals that are perfectly legitimate might not be listed immediately. And in those cases, then you need to make sure that they're published by a respected publisher. And here's where OASPA can help. So OASPA is an organization for publishers and service providers working with open access. Members here need to meet certain standards to be included. So if the journal you're considering publishing in is not included in the DOAJ and/or their publisher is not a member of OASPA, you should proceed with extreme caution. And the last resource that's not here on this slide is your library community. Librarians usually have a really good sense of who the key publishers are and what to look for in terms of predatory journals and that sort of thing. And the last thing I want to say about this is just a plug for a webinar I'm doing in May that is solely focused on predatory journals. So you can check on our Taylor and Francis events page to find more information if you'd like to learn more about that. Great. On to the next set of reasons for rejection. And I tend to group these together as I think the strategy for addressing them is similar. And this is all about the writing process here. So obviously we don't have time for a full writing workshop today, but there are just some basic tips to help you make your argument easy to read and understand. To gain a good understanding about how to communicate your research, I suggest you read a lot. And luckily you're all researchers, so that's what you do. The absolute best thing that you can do to become a great writer is to read other great writers in your field. See how they structure their papers and their arguments, how they present their data, and then model your paper structure after theirs. I'm not suggesting that you plagiarize, but you can just take it as inspiration for your own writing. If at all possible, write your paper first and edit it later, because this helps you create a through line in your paper, that line that's going to hold all the different parts together. And remember, simplicity is key, especially when you're dealing with complex problems and theories. So think about your sentence structure and your use of the passive voice. Sentences should be kept relatively short. I usually recommend 2.5 lines on a page. Otherwise, the reader might lose track of your point. And you should also think about varying the lengths of your sentences to create a rhythm in your writing. And you can kind of read your paragraphs out loud to kind of see how it's flowing. And the passive voice in sentences is sometimes necessary, such as in method sections where it's common to write the research was conducted rather than I conducted the research. However, make sure to mix it up with the active voice. The goal here is to make it as easy as possible for the reader to understand your arguments and the evidence that you're using. Now, the most important strategy to achieving this is to create a clear and easy to follow structure for your paper. And for empirical research, irrespective of discipline, most papers follow this model, the IMRAD model, though the emphasis may be put on different elements and the terminology may differ somewhat between disciplines. And lastly, I think it's useful to remember that your role is that of a storyteller. It's up to you to give life to the exciting story of your research and to translate the passion you have for the subject into a paper in an easy to follow manner. I just wanted to take a moment to focus a bit on the introduction because I think it's especially important that you create a strong introduction for your paper. The introduction lays the groundwork for the entire paper and is often the only part of the paper people will read carefully. In terms of peer review, often editors, especially those editing large journals, will carefully read the introduction and then just skim the rest of the article to decide whether it's a good fit for the journal in terms of content quality. So it's incredibly important that you create a strong and well-structured introduction. So 2 to 3 pages that establishes the research question or problem that you're exploring, and then provides a clear thesis or argument, which is easy to see and understand. So you want to make sure that your argument stands out. Don't bury it in the midst of a paragraph in the bottom of your second page. As you see with this paper, they place the main argument in the second paragraph, just after they provided the problem and background to the research. The introduction also should provide a review of the literature if that's standard in your field, although sometimes the literature review is its own section. And then you should also provide an outline of the structure of your paper, a roadmap, letting readers know what they can expect, which would be the methods or theory section, results or findings, a discussion, and finally a conclusion. But do keep in mind that some journals and disciplines require very clear structures with simple headings for the paper, such as the example here, where they've clearly labeled the different sections of the paper. So roadmap wouldn't be quite as important in those cases. Just review papers in your field and in the particular journal to see what the standard approach is and then follow that. One last point on the manuscript and writing process. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have as many people as possible read and comment on your paper throughout the writing process. And you have many resources that you can draw upon to receive good critical feedback. First of all, you have your local community, whether that's your PhD committee, for those of you that are still doing your PhD, or your colleagues. And you want to find those colleagues who will give you tough, detailed feedback, who will literally tear your paper apart with the goal of making it better. I always say those with the big red pens. Now, listen, it's also important to have those supportive colleagues who will pat you on the back and say, great job. That's really important to have those people around too. But to get your paper in the best possible shape, you need to find those who will give you that critical feedback. And don't forget to reciprocate. International and regional conferences are also a great place to share earlier versions of your paper. One of the positive outcomes of the past couple of years is that conferences have become a bit more accessible as they've moved online. And even now that we're opening up and there are in-person events, I'm finding that most of them are hybrid, so you still can join from a distance. So do try and participate in conferences if you're able, because they provide the opportunity to receive feedback from researchers from outside of your current network. Preprint servers such as Archive and bioRxiv are also great places to share earlier versions of your work. We're seeing a growth in preprint servers in a variety of subject areas, so you can look into what the prominent server is for your subject area. And the same is true with academic networking sites. And then lastly, if you have the chance, I recommend setting up a writing group at your institution or maybe across the institutions in your subject area. As a grad student, I was involved in a writing group that was set up for researchers within law and society studies. And it was comprised of researchers at all stages of their career and across a number of disciplines. And each month we would meet for lunch and we would review one person's paper. And it was a great initiative for a number of reasons. First of all, for the PhD students, it demystified the writing process a bit because we could see senior academics with plenty of publishing experience struggle with communicating their research. It helped us accept that communicating research in a clear manner is really challenging, no matter how much experience you have. And it was also really helpful to receive feedback from people outside of our discipline, as the comments usually were about how we were communicating our ideas. And lastly, it helps to keep you on track. If you know that you have to share a paper in the next session, you're going to commit to finishing a draft, even if it's not a perfect draft. The goal here is to get your paper in the best possible shape you can before you submit to a journal. Now, the third reason for rejection is that the paper in question did not follow the journal guidelines. And this is truly the easiest issue to address because every journal will have what we call instructions for authors or author guidelines. And these are literally the rule books for the journal. So under the instructions for authors, you'll find information on APCs and waivers for open access and any other fees the journal might have. For instance, in economics, sometimes they have submission fees. There'll be information about the peer review process for that particular journal. There will be information on the types of articles they accept and the word limits for those articles. There might be reporting guidelines, especially for medical titles. There will be information about how you should prepare your manuscript. So formatting, if that's relevant, headings, reference style, the type of English they want. Some journals have preferences on English, whether it's British English or American English. There will also be information about data sharing policies, and then any other relevant information, such as similarity checks that are conducted upon submission. So you definitely want to take time to review all those before you submit. Great. So the last reason for rejection is that articles contain ethical issues. So problems, ethical problems, whether they're research related to research or publishing ethics. So I'd like to take a moment to discuss some of the issues that we see with publishing ethics. And on this screen are a collection of issues that we see. And it's not complete. It seems like new issues are arising daily. But just to highlight the first and second row, many of the problems in the first and second row can be due to lack of full understanding or confusion around standards and policies, such as around authorship criteria or non-financial conflict of interest. And but they can also have elements of conscious misconduct as well. So it's always kind of a gray area for us as publishers. We have to do a lot of investigating to figure out what's going on there. And then the third row, this is conscious and very serious misconduct designed around manipulating the publishing process. So I'm just going to cover a couple of issues that we see regularly that apply to all subject areas, because some of these issues are really specific to particular areas, but some are universal. So the first issue I wanted to focus on is authorship issues. And these tend to be quite common. And these types of disputes tend to slow down the peer review and production process, because when an issue arises, we have to basically go back to the authors and say, resolve it, because we weren't involved in the writing process. We don't know what has gone on. And often the issues have to do with disagreements over who's included on the authorship line, the sequence of names, who's responsible for different parts of the process, et cetera. So to avoid any problems, it is extremely important that you have a written agreement between all of your co-authors, if you have co-authors, regarding responsibilities, the sequence of names on the authorship line, and what journal you're submitting to. Oops, sorry, just accidentally moved forward a little bit. So apart from those kind of typical authorship disputes, here are three distinct issues that we see. The first one is ghost authorship, and this is when a significant contribution to a manuscript has been made without acknowledgement of who made that contribution. So their name doesn't show up on that authorship line. And this is obviously an issue because we can't know if there was a conflict of interest. Next, we see guest authorship. And guest authorship is when authorship is granted to an individual who doesn't meet the ethical standards for authorship. And they're usually included on the authorship line because of their seniority or their reputation or their supposed influence in the field. And this has been common in some institutions, but anyone on the authorship line should have made a significant contribution to the paper, as they will be held responsible for it in the future. And then lastly, we have authorship for sale, and this has really become a massive issue in recent years. There have been a growing number of cases where different entities called paper mills offer to add an author's name after a paper has been accepted for publication, but they charge for this. And these actors are preying on the desperation of scholars who are under so much pressure to publish more and more articles and to progress in their careers. So who qualifies as an author? On this slide, I have listed all the areas that each author should have participated in or agreed to be included on that authorship line. But here are the main aspects to remember. Any listed author is a representative of the published paper and shares accountability. And corresponding authors sign author publishing agreements on behalf of all those co-authors. And it's just important to remember that authorship comes with responsibility. So you may have seen when I accidentally flipped ahead, we're going to head over to Mentimeter once more and do another poll. So this is a different model. It's truth or lie. So you have to choose which of these statements is true. So the first one is, it's okay to submit your paper, sorry, I'm missing an R there, your paper to multiple journals at one time because peer review can take a long time. The second is, it's never okay to submit to more than one journal at one time. And then the third is, it's fine to submit to 2 journals at the same time as long as you tell the editor. So the pink is lie and the blue is truth. So it seems that the second option is winning out. Here, we've got some votes for that third option. Give it a couple of seconds more. Right. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like most people agree that it is never okay to submit to more than one journal at a time. So let's just go back to our slide deck. Well, you made my job easy because this is a rule that many early career researchers are surprised by. So why might it be a problem to submit to more than one journal at a time? When you submit your paper to a journal for peer review, you are committing to publish in that journal if it's accepted. And they, in turn, will use their time and resources to review your paper and help you to improve it. And remember, you can only publish a paper once. There can only be one version of record out there. So it's really important that you only submit to one journal at a time. Now, this is really easy to detect. Often the papers are sent to the same reviewers who then alert the editors or publishers that they're looking at the same paper for 2 different or 3 different journals. And this can often happen because there wasn't that clear agreement on roles and responsibilities between co-authors. Hence, 2 of the co-authors accidentally submit the same paper to 2 different journals. But I have to tell you, editors are becoming less forgiving and a little bit more suspicious because they feel that people are doing this intentionally, and often they just withdraw the paper in question from peer review. Now, when this happens, we do go to the authors, we do ask for an explanation. There's always that benefit of the doubt, but as I say, there is evidence that people are doing this intentionally. So a lot of editors are becoming quite intolerant of it. Now, sometimes it is okay to submit work that has been presented elsewhere. You just need to be honest with the editor about previous presentations or publications or postings. Transparency is key in this process. So for instance, if you published an article in another language, but would like to publish it in English, just contact the editor of the journal you'd like to publish with and ask them if they'd be interested in publishing a translation. Similarly, with data presented at conferences, it's not unusual to publish an article that's based on content presented at a conference as part of the process. Just make sure to clearly state that the data or an earlier version of the paper was presented at the conference. And then preprints, which I mentioned earlier, no longer an issue for most journals. Again, you need to cite that original posting in your paper, let the editor know that a version of your paper can be found in an archive or repository and provide a link to that. Now, I would normally discuss plagiarism and self-citation in this talk, but we are out of time, I think. I want to be able to cover peer review, but we do have a lot of ethics talks that you can attend if you would be interested in finding out more about that. So peer review, I really like this quote. I think it captures the importance of peer review. Not only is it quality control, but it's also a form of collaboration between researchers. And researchers agree that peer review is an essential part of the process. So the chart on the screen is from a somewhat dated but massive peer review study that was conducted in 2018 by Publons. And here you can see that the majority of researchers find peer review either important or extremely important. Peer review is where papers are assessed for the different elements that we've discussed today. So is the article a good fit? Does it follow the guidelines? Is the research novel or is it sound science? Does the evidence support the findings? Is it contributing to the body of literature? Is it well written? Are there any ethical issues? These types of things. With the increase of manuscripts submitted annually and the diverse areas of research and the global nature of the academic community, it is unrealistic to think that an editor could make all these decisions on their own. They're not going to have the expertise in all the subject areas and the emergent fields of study. So they need to depend on external experts who can evaluate the content. Peer review helps improve the research and the communication of the findings through recommendations. And as highlighted on this slide, peer review is, in a sense, a collaboration with the broader community designed to help you publish the very best version of your work. And lastly, peer review validates research. The editors and the peer reviewers, when accepting a paper, are giving it a stamp of approval, confirming that it is sound science. So let's take a look at what peer review looks like in practice. So there are 3 types of peer review that you're likely to come across. And the first is called single anonymous. Sometimes it's referred to as single blind. And this is when the peer reviewer knows the identity of the author, but the author doesn't know the identity of the peer reviewer. And this is the most common type of peer review within science, technology, and medical disciplines. The second type is double anonymous or double blind. And this is where all identities are hidden. And this tends to be the most common type within arts and humanities and social sciences. And then lastly, we have open peer review, and this is where all identities are known. But keep in mind, there are many different varieties of open peer review, from the basic where everyone's identity is known to a completely open process where the public can see the submitted version of the article, all of the peer reviewer and author's comments, and the different versions of the paper. And if you want to see an example of that, you can check out our F1000 platform because they practice open peer review, so you can see what it looks like in practice. So make sure to review the instructions for authors before you submit so that you're aware of the type of peer review the journal conducts. All right, we're going to do one last Mentimeter poll because I'd like to get your thoughts on the type of peer review you would prefer as an author. So would you like that single anonymous where the peer reviewer knows your identity, but you don't know the peer reviewer's identity? Double anonymous where all identities are hidden? Or open peer review where everyone's identity is exposed? So we have lots of votes for double anonymous. We've got some for open. Many people feel that double anonymous and open peer review eliminates bias, whereas single anonymous, a lot of people are worried about bias within that system or that method. But it looks like double anonymous is the most popular. I assume a lot of you aren't familiar with open peer review. But as said, a lot of journals and platforms are adopting open peer review, and it's a really interesting model, I think. Great. All right. Wonderful. Let's see. So here's just a quick overview of how peer review works in most cases. So you'll submit your manuscript to the journal, and it will go through an initial check to see if everything's in order. So if it's not formatted correctly, if that's relevant, or if it's missing any files or forms or other components, it will be returned to you with instructions on what to do. And then once all the files are in order, the submission is sent to the editor for a quick review. So the editor doesn't see that initial the initial article until it's been approved by the admin folks, and then they send it on. And the editor will take a look at the paper and decide if it should be sent out to peer review. At this stage, it can be rejected if it's out of scope of the journal, if it's not complete, if it's unreadable or not understandable. And this is called a desk reject. And these decisions usually come fairly quickly, usually, within 1 or 2 weeks. Now, if the paper is of interest, the editor will then send it out for peer review, usually to 2 or more external reviewers who are specialists in that particular area. And they'll read the work and provide a report to the editor with recommendations for a decision. So they don't make the decision, they just provide a report with recommendations for the editor to make a decision. And the most common recommendations are revise and resubmit with either major revisions or with minor revisions. And if you get this decision, you should celebrate, because this means they're interested in your work, but they have suggestions on how you can improve it. Now, revise and resubmit with major revisions, that means you still have a lot of work to do, but there's something in your paper that the peer reviewers find promising. It could be the data you're using, or your argument, or the way you're formatting, the paper, the writing style you're using. It could be anything. But you still have a lot of work. It's not guaranteed that the paper will be accepted in the end. Revise and resubmit with minor revisions. That usually means there's just some small things that you need to amend in your paper, some adjustments that you might need to make. But if you address those, then usually the paper is accepted. Sometimes it's even called provisional acceptance. Now, your paper obviously can be rejected at this point. And then I also include accept with a star. It is possible that your paper will be accepted but without revisions, but it's highly unlikely. And I always tell the story of Eugene Fama, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics a few years ago. And being in Stockholm, I was able to go to that lecture, which I couldn't understand because it was fairly advanced mathematics. But at one point, Eugene Fama was presenting the work that led him to win the Nobel Prize, and he must have been in his mid-70s at that point. And he's presenting one of the papers, and he steps back and goes, I think that was the only paper that was ever accepted without revisions. So here's a man who just won the Nobel Prize in his 70s, and he had one paper or maybe 2 papers in his career that were accepted without revisions. That's just to say revisions are part of the process, because every piece of writing can be improved upon. Now, once you make your revisions, you will resubmit to the editor, who will either accept the paper at that point, or they'll send it out again to the reviewers to see if they're happy or if they have further comments. Now, here's the bad news. Your paper can go through that cycle a couple of times and still be rejected, but I'll tell you how to avoid that in just a moment. Responding to reviewers' comments is a really important part of the publishing process. And at times when you receive the reviewer report, it can feel like a rejection, especially with the revise and resubmit with major revisions. Try not to become upset. Close your computer for a couple of days if you're upset, and just forget about it. And then when you're ready to get back to work, carefully read the decision letter from the editor, because it may include advice on how to respond to the reviewer's comments, especially if they're suggesting kind of opposing things. And it will definitely provide information about deadlines and returning revisions. If you have co-authors, set up a meeting to review all of the reviewer comments. So make certain to share the reports that you've received with everyone ahead of time so that you can have a productive meeting. And then irrespective if you have co-authors or not, you want to carefully go through those reviewer reports and make a list with each one of their suggestions for improvement. You might want to group them by category if that's helpful, all the comments about the literature review or all the comments about the method section, whatever works. The most important thing is that you capture each one of their suggestions. And then you need to go through that list and decide which recommendations you'd like to adopt and then make those changes in your manuscript. Now, here's the key to avoiding the fate of going through the revisions process a couple of times and still being rejected. When you send your paper back, with the revisions, you must include a note to the editor clearly detailing how you've addressed the peer reviewer's concerns. So where you've adopted the peer reviewer's recommendations, you want to clearly detail what you've changed and where that change can be located. So page and line number, you can highlight the change in your paper. Some journals do welcome the use of track changes to help the editors and peer reviewers see what you've done, but you still need that cover letter explaining what you've done. Now, you're not going to agree with all the peer reviewers' recommendations. So it's absolutely natural. In that case, though, you need to clearly and respectfully explain why you chose not to amend your paper, why you chose not to adopt one of their recommendations. And again, be specific. So for example, if the peer reviewer thought you should cite another paper, but you feel that it's out of scope of your project, explain why that is so that so that the editor understands your logic. Now, once you've detailed how you've addressed each of the peer reviewers' comments, review your response to the editor and make sure that you've included all the recommendations and actions that you've taken and that you've done so in a really clear manner and that the letter's professional and devoid of any frustration. This can be a super challenging process, so it's understandable if you become a bit frustrated. It's just important that that doesn't influence the communication that you have with the editor. Most importantly, remember to be respectful and professional during this process. This is your community, your future network. You may end up submitting to the journal again. You may be asked to peer review articles. You may want to become a board member one day, or you may have dreams of collaborating with the individuals that are currently reviewing your paper. So keep all of this in mind during the process. And remember, the peer reviewers and editors are just trying to help you publish the very best version of your work. Try not to take the feedback you receive on your article personally. It's about the research, not about you as a person. So just a quick recap here. Sorry, I think I've totally run over time with those with those polls. But again, on the first one, just remember to carefully read the aims and scope of the journal and look at what's been previously published. For number two, that's about what I talked about at the very beginning, taking the time to understand what sort of writing project you're undertaking and researching the best platform for your work. 3, read and follow the instructions for authors. 4 through 9, that's about sharing your work a lot, getting as much feedback as you can before peer review. And then the last one, you just really want to avoid at all costs. And if you're confused about the rules of publishing, all publishers have information about the kind of publication ethics and the rules and editorial policies and that sort of thing. So that's it for me. And there's my contact information.
Sorry, thank you so much, Victoria. I just wanted to say we started with 291 participants and we end with 315, which clearly shows how relevant and engaging this was. And I think everybody has already learned a lot and the questions are coming in. So we now have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A, but thereafter we will have 2 more speakers and they will talk about some of the issues that you're already touching on. I'm just saying predatory publishing, ChatGPT is a keyword nowadays, open access, etc. So stay with us, but let me go through all the questions. And I'd like to start off and I'd like to invite Rick and Barry and Victoria, the 3 of you to answer these questions as you feel most appropriate. So Tahir Basha Shaikh from Indonesia asked the first question. He wanted a little bit of background on the difference between paid and free publishing journals? What's
So
the
a bit of
major
the-
difference?
Yeah, so the major difference is, I mean, traditionally journals were print journals. So institutions and individuals would subscribe to these journals and receive a copy. And that's how publishing worked forever, for the longest time, until the 90s. And then we moved to kind of digital publishing, where all the journals moved online. And around that time, this open access movement kind of arose, where people were saying, oh, we really want all of this research to be accessible to anywhere in the world. So then publishers had to think about, okay, how do we make that work? Because, you know, with open access, we wouldn't be getting subscriptions, but we still need to cover the costs that we have with publishing. And so then the model changes. So instead of pay to read, which is kind of the subscription model, it moves to a pay to publish. So then it's usually, as I said, a funder or an institution is paying for those articles to be published. And then those articles are freely available for anywhere, but only in a digital format. So then you won't have that print journal, but it will be accessible anywhere in the world in a digital format. I don't know if Barry or Rick wants to add on anything there.
That's a perfect answer, I would say.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Barry.
Thank you so much.
I do recall at the very beginning when people talk about open access, it's more from the medical side. Because
Yes.
whatever people develop is for the greater good of the humankind, and medical is one of the most important area. So it doesn't matter you are a rich country, poor country, everyone can have access, especially the new medical developments. Yeah, but now after that, then of course, all different subject areas talk about open access. Yeah.
Good point.
Thank you so much. And I apologize already to the listeners. I'm not doing them in order because we have a second session. So your question might come at the end. Let me turn to a question from Indonesia, from Kumutini. Kumutini is asking, novelty is both a cherished and abhorred term. In terms of publications, does novelty cover new and innovative improvements to existing practice, or does it only apply to completely new materials?
It can apply to so many different things. It can be a new approach to communicating the research. It could be anything, because, you know, research is so varied across disciplines. The difference between novelty and sound science is, with sound science, you might have null results. So it might be just running, you know, reporting on, we did this experiment and, you know, the findings were negative. That would be kind of sound science. Whereas with novelty, it's usually something new. There's going to be something that's a little fresh perspective. It could be new materials. It just could be a new application of theory. I don't know if Barry or Rick wants to add to that.
Indeed, it could be very small, something that's new and just a small increment in the context of human knowledge. It doesn't have to be a major breakthrough or a brand new theory which revolutionizes the field.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be earth-shattering every time.
Not every time.
Thank you. There's another question here from Jamalia Jamil from Malaysia. And this refers to the whole issue of predatory publishers. And this created quite a bit of back and forth in the chat room, in case you've had a look at it. And it refers to MDPI and Frontier. What is the stand on researchers that are quoting the journals from these publishers? How is this handled? Are they openly considered predatory? Are they? What is your insight? There was a little bit of confusion amongst the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's varied opinions on those two publishers. There's a lot of discussion about the model that they use. They're publishing a lot. And I think, you know, people are a bit surprised by that. I don't think that there's a general consensus that they're predatory publishers. There's different opinions out there, is what I would say. But I don't know if Barry or Rick would like to.
Yes, it's a slightly grey area, because as Victoria says, they're both publishing a great deal, and a great deal very fast. So that does raise concerns about quality control and their methodology. I don't know specifically how they operate. I've only ever worked at Taylor & Francis, but I know that some institutions probably look at them in a less favorable light than they would look at the major publishers, Taylor & Francis, Royal Scientific, Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, etc., and the institutions publishing like AIP and Royal Society of Chemistry. These are all very well established publishers. So my instinct is to stick with something that you know, but it is a bit of a grey area. Your institution may have already made a decision, so I would double check with your institution. I know the provost of one university in Malaysia, for example, has made it very clear where he wants his researchers to publish. And I suspect there's many institutions that are now making it equally clear.
Yeah, I happened to met up with the owner of MDPI quite a number of times when he was in Singapore. I did talk to him about actually some of the things that he's been doing. I would say that, yes, different people really have different opinion, especially for these few major open access publishers, because some of them really, as what Barry and Victoria said, they do publish quite a lot. And then some of them actually have very high impact factor and really one of the some key journals people within the field know about it. But there might be also some practice that they have been doing, like soliciting papers, like creating special issues that actually draw a lot of negative attention. Now, having said that, I don't know deep enough internally how they run the journals. But I think at the end of the day, if you talk to different people, actually recently we talked to people, a few editor-in-chief from Europe, from UK, from Germany, and from Spain, and all three, and some really have a very negative opinion on open access, but some are really positive about open access. Even within open access itself, is not as universal as what we thought at one point. The idea whether open access is a good thing or bad thing. Yeah, so I would say that, yeah, you really, for an early career researcher, I think you at some point better be safe than sorry, especially you're so early in your career to start something. Because I did hear, especially some senior professor in China, they said that, okay, if someone published in a predatory journal, I mean, his name will be tarnished from then on.
That's true.
It can be as bad as that. So if I were you at your age, I would be careful. I would be careful. Even though I don't agree that maybe not everything are bad, but yeah, they might have some bad publicity.
I'd just like to clarify, there's nothing wrong in publishing open access.
No.
And indeed, mandates in Europe are now very strong. And even the OSTP, White House in America, has mandated that all federal funded research must be open access at a certain time. So forgive me, it's not open access is the problem, it's the predatory publishers that have taken advantage of the requirements by institutions to their students on them to publish, that these predatory publishers have moved into the ecosystem. Some clearly predatory, and we do what we can to eliminate them from the ecosystem. Some are grey because of their methods are a little bit radical. Others are very clearly completely legitimate, and all of us as big publishers, we all have legitimate open access solutions. And Taylor & Francis with F1000, which is one of our divisions, has not only open access publishing, but a very open, transparent peer review process, which a lot of people, as has already been said, not sure that everyone wants open peer review, but that is a trend.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I agree. Yeah. Because in our case, actually, if you think about 10 years ago, actually, we don't even have any open access journal, but now we have 30 plus. Open access doesn't mean it's negative, but there are people really have negative thoughts about open access.
Well, let us get back to this in a minute. Thank you so much. I think the advice that stuck with me is you have to, in a way, also check with your university or maybe with the funder that is funding your studies and what their advice is, because it's about your own career and you don't want to take any risks with that. And I hope Jolene Fu from Malaysia, you ask a similar question. I hope that helps you as well. Let us get back to maybe some more practical questions. I have two here that are a little bit similar. They're from Yohani Shamindi and from Novian Darmawan from Indonesia. And they would like to have a little bit more explanation about preprint, apologies. And specifically, Novian is asking, what are your opinions on open access preprint archives? And he's mentioning CHEM RXIV. Does your journal accept papers that have previously published on preprint archives?
Yeah, we changed our policy back in 2019. So I think that was 2019. So our journals do accept articles that have been posted in preprint server. As I mentioned, it's really good when you submit your article, you'll probably have a cover letter. And in that cover letter, you can say, I've posted my article in a preprint server. Here's the link to where you can find it. And then after your article is published, go back to that preprint server and add the link to the version of record so that you have that nice little circle there and people can find that final version of record. But, a lot of people have been nervous about preprint servers, but there's really great things about them. Number one, the speed. As we all know, peer review can take some time. So you're getting your research out there, people can find it, it's there, it's accessible, it has potential to have greater impact because people are seeing it earlier. You're establishing authorship early, because you've got this record. I was there first, here's the article. So no one can scoop you. And of course, we all have to, as readers, be aware of anything on a preprint server hasn't been peer reviewed. So we need to keep that in mind. That's why it's really important to go back and put that link to that final version of record so that people can see what happened to that article, what changes actually were made during peer review. But I'm a big fan. I think it's great. And we saw with COVID, it was so important with COVID, getting that stuff out there early.
Thank you so much. Another practical question is from Muzaimi in Malaysia, who's asking, often English editing service is placed as a part of journal requirements for the manuscript, which is likely to add to the costs on the side of the author. Are there any suggestions on how to help cut costs from having to pay for this kind of English editing service?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing some trials right now, but yeah, editing services can be quite costly. There's no way around it. I mean, what I would do is I would look for local solutions. If you can, check with the university, see if there are any services there, where you can go in and have some language editing done. The other thing is, see if you can find people that have a lot of experience publishing in English, or if you've got somebody who is, a native English speaker around that can just read your paper for fluency and just do that initial read through. That can help a lot in the peer review process. I don't know if Barry or Rick, if you have any perspectives on language editing and.
No, that's good advice. On our sites, we have links to editing services, and I think certainly asking around and trying to keep it local, support the local industry. There's usually people in most countries that offer such services. You don't have to go to one of the big international service companies who are very good. I'm not saying that, but there's usually local solutions.
Yeah, but I can share some of my experience because when I study in US, actually, English not my first language anyway. When I publish, actually, yes, my colleagues, my classmates, all this can help a lot. I mean, definitely you need to have more friends who are native speakers. Then make your life much easier. And they are more willing to help you. Of course, at the end of the day, I think it's also good to have some senior people who have published before to help to give a second pair of eyes to look around, to spot anything wrong. And having said that, actually, we are also looking into solution to provide some very cost-effective way to help at least to do some technical check. Which can be, some of them may be even free. We are looking to be part of our author services and help the author, the author to improve the language. But I think definitely making friends is most important.
Yeah. And this is, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, Ezra Klein. If any of you listen to his podcast, it's always very informative, but he was doing one on AI and they were talking a lot about translation. That's where we're going to really see the benefits of the developments with AI. So hopefully there's a point in time where you can write your paper in your own language and then put it through a system and it's going to be able to translate it flawlessly. So.
Thank you so much. There's a question from Thailand. Hong Saton asks, how can we make negative findings if the science behind it is sound, convincing to the publishers or the peer reviewers?
Yeah, you just need to look. This is again going to the aims and scope of the journal and finding out what type of research you're interested in. Some will say they just want novel research. They just want new research. But like F1000 that we've mentioned a couple of times, they publish sound science. They just want good, solid, sound science. And they see the benefit in null results because that makes research much more economical. People say, oh, somebody tried that, great, I'm going to take another path. So it's really about reading those aims and scope statements just to find out if they are interested in null results, because they will clearly state that.
Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions here related to peer review. I'm going to put them together. Nicolasa Florentino from the Philippines is asking, if I have not heard from the publisher for more than 2 months, does that mean that I have been rejected? And also from the Philippines, from Ray is asking, in case your manuscript was rejected, can the reviewers of the new submission access the reviews of the previous submission? So first of all, if they haven't heard in a while, does it automatically mean rejected? And B, can the second submission reviewer see the comments of the first one?
Great. So the first question is a variation of a question I get in every single one of my sessions, and that is, how long does peer review take? So it varies. And just to kind of give you an idea, you know, we publish a lot of arts and humanities and social science journals. So when I used to manage journals, when I was talking to my editors and we would look at the peer review times, we would always say, you know, the ideal is to have it under 3 months. You know, you really want to get that first answer back to someone within 3 months. Now, sometimes it goes over those 3 months. There's a lot of things like global pandemics, really busy people who have accepted the role of peer reviewer and then they don't get the report back in time. Various things can delay that process. But I would say if it's only been 2 months, it's likely still under review. If it gets to 4 months and you haven't heard anything, it's perfectly fine to send just a very polite note to the editors just saying, hey, can I get a little bit of an update on my paper? It's been about 4 months. I just want to check the status. And then usually they'll come back to you with more information. Now, the second one was,
if you've submitted a second time, if you've submitted a second time,
right,
there's a different reviewer.
Yeah. Now, that's an very interesting question, because normally the answer would be no, because you probably submitted to a new journal and they've got their own peer review pool and their own editorial processes. However, many publishers have started doing what they call cascading peer reviews. So you might, submit to one journal and then they say, this journal doesn't fit, or maybe it goes through the peer review process and there's some comments attached to it, but they decide to reject it. And then they give the author an option of transferring their submission to another journal. Some journals will look at those first peer review reports and go, and maybe that's enough for that journal. Maybe they say, oh, their comments don't really apply for our journal because it really was a problem with the article in question not fitting the scope of our journal. Otherwise, they might send it out to peer review and they might attach those early peer reviews. Other journals also like to share peer review, but all of this information will be made clear to you ahead of time. So it's not going to be something that, you submit to a journal and then you find out, oh, they're sharing all this information. It should be something that you're aware of before you enter into peer review. But again, in most cases, they won't be sharing those peer review reports.
Thank you. And we have 2 more questions because Rick and Barry will want to talk to us a little bit more in depth about predatory publishing, open access, ChatGPT, etc. And all the questions that you have asked related to open access or predatory publishing, don't worry, we'll ask them after their presentations. I have 2 more quick questions that I think everybody would like to listen to. So we have Trang Nguyen from Vietnam is asking, what is the main difference in writing an article or versus a chapter in a book, because this person was refused once, or the journal submission was rejected because it was thought to be better published in the form of a book chapter. So what is the main difference between an article and a book chapter?
I think Barry and I will have to tag team this one. I would say an article has a very particular structure. As I said, most follow that IMRAD structure, and it's very particular. It's going to have, different elements. I would say it's more concise in some ways. It's its own little unit. Barry, I don't know if you want to kind of talk about how a book chapter.
That's right. Almost by definition, a chapter is part of a longer story, a longer narrative. So there's got to be some kind of alignment with the other chapters in the book. That's where an editor comes in. Maybe editor or co-editor of the book would ensure that there's some kind of continuity in the chapters. So yes, there's similarity, and often chapters you'll see, chapters originally published in a journal article, maybe several years in the past. That's really quite well, it's not uncommon. Rick,
Thank you.
You do a bit of both, Rick, in World Scientific.
Yeah, we do both
Right.
books and journals. I think one of the things that is a very clear cut to me is normally journal articles are more leading edge research information, and anything on books is not as leading edge, because by the time the book is out, it's probably maybe months or years later. So put in a chapter is a bit kind of tell you that this is something is not really at the leading edge, because you don't know when the book will come out.
Right.
So
Part of a story, part of a longer story.
Yes.
Good. And then I'm going to split up the last two questions. One for Rick, and I'll ask them both before I let you answer. Rick, the question for you is, if I am a total beginner in the area of publishing and I haven't really published a lot, may I try to write a review paper for a well-reputed and, of course, tier 1 journal? That's for you. And for you, Barry and Victoria, the question is, what is Taylor and Francis's policy with regards to ghost authorship? Is it assessed in any way?
I can answer first, right? Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's not. I would say that if you are really in your own field, although you publish very little, it's still okay for you to write a review, but in a more concise way. But you cannot have a very long review paper. You still can have a short review paper and where the latest development, because you are in it. You are into this now, and then you write something about what's happening in a short period of time, but not a longer period of time, because you're just started. Yeah, so I would think that, I mean, we will consider that kind of review paper, yes.
Great. I guess I can take a stab at the ghost authorship. I think I mentioned that in my slide, and ghost authorship isn't really allowed. Anybody that contributes to a paper needs to show up on that authorship line, because we can't know if there are conflicts of interest or anything like that. So when an issue comes up with ghost authorship, we intervene in some way on the paper. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Barry.
No, I think that's very clear, actually.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. The questions do keep coming in, and we will, of course, make sure that our speaker study have them, but we still have some time, and we do not want to miss out on the insight from Barry and from Rick on how the publishing scene is changing. And we're hearing a lot about it: open access publishing, the prevalence of predatory journals, but also something like AI coming along and publishing for you. So maybe, I know both of you have prepared a little bit for us. I leave it to you to decide who'd like to go first, but maybe if you could give us maybe a little bit of a roundup of your expertise, your view on what's new, what is important, how does the audience tackle it? And then we still have some time to answer questions. Rick, would you like to go first?
Sure. I need to share. Let me see. I need to start. Let me see. Let me start the presentation, and then I share the screen. I think that is the one. Just sorry, give me a second. I can't see where it's a share screen.
It's the
This
green
one.
one at the bottom, exactly.
Yeah. And then share. Am I sharing?
Yes, it's still working.
It's
Yes.
working?
No, we only see the black screen so far, at least me.
Oh, my Zoom quit unexpected. Oops.
You need to double click. If you click again, click.
Oh, some technical problem now. I get hanged.
Oh, I see. Do you want to hand over to Barry first?
Yeah,
Barry,
I don't Barry go first.
Barry, if you go first, and then Rick can try to get the knot out of his cable.
Sure. And you'll be glad to hear I don't have any presentation prepared, so I can just talk to the screen. Funny enough, I've just been asked to talk about AI in publishing, but through the lens of copyright. There's a major copyright convention happening in Singapore quite soon. The International Federation of Reprographic Rights Organizations are holding a summit in Singapore next month. I've just been asked to join a panel to talk about AI as it affects copyright from an academic publisher's point of view. So I'm in the process of gemming up on this topic. There's a very good paper written recently about AI and the use of AI in academia. I forget the author's name, but he basically said that AI is here to stay. We can't turn back the clock. AI is here. The thing to do is to register and acknowledge that it's here, cite anything that's generated by AI. But I think his main message was that AI is probably useful at this stage only for structuring essays, structuring articles, structuring your arguments, not for writing the articles. So it will probably improve over the years to come. We could get into sort of an Asimov or Arthur C. Clarke kind of world in the near future, where you have robots generating very, very convincing human-like articles and poems and literature, art. I mean, that's happening in experimental areas as we speak. I think for academic publishing, as I say, we accept that it's part of the ecosystem, but there's very clear ethical guidelines about the use of AI. And I think there's an organization, COPE, the Committee on Publishing Ethics, that has set out guidelines on this and our position as an industry. So yes, AI is with us to stay. Don't use it to write your research. If you do use it at all, make sure you cite it. Make sure you're very clear about that as a source of reference. 10 years ago, Wikipedia was probably not accepted as a reference for at university level essays, but I know my daughter who's just finished a master's at Bristol, she did reference Wikipedia, and it does seem to be accepted now. So things move along in publishing and academia. Victoria, I don't know if you've got anything to add on AI in particular before we talk about other aspects of open peer review.
No, not at this point. I mean, it is kind of a moving space right now, but yeah, we're trying to put the guardrails around it as best we can.
But you agree that we can't go backwards. It's here to stay without question.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll see the positive benefits of it. As I said, with translation and things like that,
Yes.
I think it could be, really exciting what we see in the future.
Yes, translation, very good point. Is there any other questions specifically about?
No, no one is asking about AI just yet. Maybe they're all using the chat box. So please continue, Barry.
Well, I mean, that's all I have to say on AI. As Victoria said, it's a very fast-moving topic. I need to gem up myself. I happen to notice that the IB, the International Baccalaureate, which is a secondary school qualification system, they also accept the use of AI amongst secondary students. Again, as long as they cite and quote where they're getting their input from. So
Thank
I think
you, Jim.
there's some basic underpinning aspects of writing, of research, of publishing. Arguably, some of those basics go back 200 or 300 years. In that sense, the technology comes and goes, but the core essence of servicing academia, of publishing, actually there's some remarkable continuity despite the technological advances.
Barry, there are actually questions coming in now, and someone is asking, and this is from Vietnam, Hong Yuan is asking, is it okay to, sorry, this is from, it's moving so fast. It's from Tin Ma Lin. She's asking, is it okay if we reconstruct the sentence by using Killbot or ChatGPT to write a paper? So what's the...
Well, I think this is going to happen, but I think if you do use any of these software or this free to access tools, please do reference them. I think that's important. It's probably a bit too new, and I'm not close enough to the actual publishing process now to know whether that's actually come up in particular articles or particular journals yet. So what I plan to do is get some case studies for when I'm talking in a month's time at this copyright event. But
There's another great question, Barry, and maybe also for Victoria or Rick if he's listening. It's how do you deal with pieces that are published by GBT and Wikipedia? Would you cite them in your journal, in your paper? How do you deal with this?
You've got to cite it, as I say, and again, Wikipedia, that does get cited now. It's improved a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. It's not as authoritative as other sources of information, obviously, but I think citing is the key thing. Whether we've got the software, whether we've got the ability to detect it 100% of the time remains to be seen. Of course, there's Turnitin and other software for detecting standard plagiarism, detecting AI-generated content. It's a bit of a sort of a race, is it not, between the authoritative publishers and people out there coming up with new ways of doing things. The big tech companies are always going to be looking at probing into the future.
Thank you. And there's so many questions coming in, but as you said, this is basically developing as we're having this session. So maybe we'll have a dedicated session on this, yes, because the questions are also, how are publishers keeping up with copyright? How do they use AI to detect whether AI is in fact writing a journal? So this is a whole can of worms that is just being opened, and we'll have to all find our way around it. But maybe, Barry, if we turn our attention back to the open access, I know that Taylor and Francis is really a strong proponent of open access. Maybe you could share some insight on that and also juxtaposition it with the predatory publishing, which is a key concern for a lot of the audience today.
Yes, no, I fully understand. And yes, in fact, arguably, we've had open access options on some of our journals for the best part of 20 years. Sort of gold and green OA has been with us for a long time. A lot of institutions have been setting up repositories with mixed results, in all honesty. Some national repositories have started, but compliance is generally quite low in my experience. So there's got to be other solutions out there. The big turning point came in Europe when Plan S, as it was called, sort of a coalition of funders got together and said that there really must be open access solutions to the academia, or everything, if it's funded by government, it should be freely accessible to the people in the countries. Maybe forgetting the fact that if you've got open access, which is funded by, say, German funding bodies, that's then open to everybody on the whole planet, regardless of their ability to pay, which sounds very good, but also creates new sets of imbalances. So a paywall, if you like, is going from point of access to the point of publishing. Not everyone's got the fees available, not the funds rather, available to publish open access. And that is a very big problem. And I saw some of the questions earlier or comments about the APCs and the price of APCs, which is a barrier, just like the subscription price was a barrier and still is, because it's a mixed ecosystem. And it is a mixed ecosystem. I need to stress that there's no one solution to publishing, there's no one solution to academia. Open access is an option. Do consider carefully when you decide what journal to publish in, whether it's open access, if that's what you want. There are new ways of publishing which are more open. I mentioned F1000, which is born digitally 10 years ago, open access publisher to service the needs of the mandates in Europe, especially in biomedical sciences. But now F1000 accepts articles in every subject. And the mandates have extended not only across Europe, but into America, Australia, less so in this part of the world. There's a few mandates out there, but again, the compliance is not enforced. And there's green and there's gold and there's different ways of doing open access. This ecosystem has changed, allowing for predatory publishers to emerge, with the need to publish being ever greater, even at master's levels in Indonesia, I know that, and certainly postgraduate, you've got to be seen to be published before you progress in your careers. That requirement to publish has resulted in predatory publishers emerging. And that's, we stressed, Victoria did a great job in stressing the importance of being wary of predatory publishers. Think, check before you submit. That's the key message I would reinforce.
Thank you, Barry, so much. We don't have so much time. I also want to invite Rick to share his insight with us. Rick, before I hand over to you, because I want to make sure that we also answer the questions of our audience members. So maybe the one question that we have here is from Suprita in Thailand, and the question is, what should we do if the open access journal that I chose to publish my paper later turns out to be predatory? What is the procedure? Maybe Barry, to hand over the baton to Rick.
That will be tough. Done is done. Difficult to go back. That will be tough. Frankly, I also don't know what it's going to do. I mean, it's already, you publish there and then later decided this is really a predatory. So that's why I said that has to be very careful, especially you're young, early career, better be safe than sorry. Yeah. So sometimes done is done. You cannot turn back the clock. And bear in mind, once it's published, you cannot take it down. Okay. Yeah, just like that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And maybe Rick, if you'd like to come in now and share also your thoughts with us.
Okay. I hope this time it works. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. Exactly.
Okay, I think I just focus on actually Barry also mentioned the same thing, is on the AI tools. And in fact, 2 weeks ago, the STM, the Science Technical Medical Organization, has a webinar, and we'll talk about exactly ChatGPT. And the webinar was so overwhelming that I can't even get registered, but I get the recording afterward. And then one of the things that I want to show is in this page is actually they do, during the conversation, people understand it's going to stay. It's not going anywhere. And it's just how we are going to use it and use it responsibly. And as I show here, it did emphasize some of the good thing about using AI tools like ChatGPT, especially in the language support side. It does help, for example, summarization of content within your article. That kind of things, it may help to summarize in a language that is easier to understand, and also in terms of translation. Or especially for some non-native English speaker to write sentences or paragraph in a more proper ways. But having said that, at the end of the day, you still need a human being to go through it. You cannot just retake whatever is given. Now, there are things, of course, they are not, has to be careful, certain things you are not supposed to do. And in code, what Barry just mentioned actually is spelled out very clearly. The two main points is AI tools cannot be as author or co-author. So that is not acceptable. The reason is because as an author, you have responsibility. You are responsible for whatever is written. But how can ChatGPT be responsible for things that it provides? That cannot be an author. And if you use AI tools, actually during the talk, actually at STM talk, they do agree that yeah, AI tools can be used, but has to be transparent. Transparent in the sense that you have to really drop down where it was used and which tool you use. So you can put it in the acknowledgement, you can put it in the method and so on, but you has to be transparent. And that seems to me is quite acceptable, because we also have to put up a similar statement in our own publication, and then we look around. Other publishers are also adopting the same way of accepting AI tools. So I think this is quite a standard way of dealing with AI tools these days. Okay, then the next thing is talk about predatory journals and publishers. Of course, I mean, we've been talking about think, check, and submit. Sometimes I want to really pinpoint when we talk about think, check, and submit, what is it all about? And basically is ask yourself some question, you think about it, and then you check whether all these things are correct or not, and then finally decide whether you want to submit. I just highlight a few things. Some of them actually can be quite common sense in a way. Yeah, whether, for example, the thing whether it's a trusted journal or publisher, how do you do that? I mean, the one way you do it is actually just ask around and look at who published it, and look at the journals, who publish in those journals, and how they cite. Do you know anyone publishing those journals? And check whether this is the right journal for your work. I mean, there are, as what it was mentioned previously, I mean, some of these predatory publisher, I mean, the way they can accept anything, kind of, as long as you are willing to pay. So asking around, read the articles is important. And there are a lot of cases people accidentally choose a predatory publisher or journals. Actually, it happens even to World Scientific. Why? Because there are another publishing house which is a predatory, using almost exactly the same name as World Scientific. So we have author, we have managing editors come and check with us, and then we find that yes, that is actually a different publisher, but they make it looks like us. So we have to do something about it. So be careful, don't be fooled by this kind of ways to tell you this is the legitimate publisher. And another thing is, a lot of times, I mean, all these predatory publisher is just a website and then just collecting money. I mean, you contact them, and getting a phone number is one of the easy way. Okay, at least he has a physical presence rather than anyone on the website. And of course, then you look at some indexes and archive whether they are there or not. But having said that, even though recently those publishers who are being identified as predatory, they are also being indexed, and they are also their articles also archived. So, but whether they are really predatory, I think sometimes it's really, it depends on who you ask. Some people may have different opinions. And of course, if you are confident all these questions are being addressed, and then you can try to submit to those journals. Okay, I think that is something I think is the easy way to look into that, to understand how the whole thing works. Another thing I want to point out that actually I just knew it last week about this particular website, and they call the predatory reports.org. I didn't know about it because I know about the bell list, all these things, but this is really new to me. And my colleagues showed me, and then looks like it just came out early last year. And it did point out those few publishers just now mentioned about Frontiers, MDPI are all predatory. I think all the journal in MDPI are all classified as predatory. Now, I will be very careful when I read any reports like that. Yeah, one of the reasons is the creators remain anonymous. So you can't tell who wrote it and what's the purpose of doing it. But at the end, but they did mention some of the posts, they explain, have some references that you can verify yourself. what I'm trying to say is a lot of things on the internet, it can be difficult to tell whether they are true or not true. And you really have to use your own common sense, use your own logic to decide, even though people say that they are predatory or not predatory. So I think that is the most important thing. As a researcher, you know how to find out the facts using your own ways. There are other ways to do it. And as I say, word of mouth is very important as well, especially when you're early career researcher. You really need to build up your network to know people from other continents, from other areas to find out more. I mean, one of my paper, actually I published to someone that I never met before from Europe when I was in US. So, I mean, that is how we make friends. I mean, I have co-author. So I think that is how it should be done. Okay, I think I just stop here about the sharing. I mean, any question, please feel free to ask me.
Thank you so much, Rick. And I think you answered a couple of questions that our audience members had. Namely, they were also looking for some form of archive to see which journals are labeled as predatory or not, and also how to spot one. And I think what you said is exactly true. You need to do your work as a researcher and a scientist, cross-reference or look around in your network, ask your supervisors, etc., and then find out. And then, of course, not take any chances with your own career and try the easy way, even if the other one might be longer. Now, before we close, I think our colleagues from NASDA are going to post a quick poll. So as we're all filling this in, I'd like to, first of all, assure everyone, if your question was not answered, then please don't be upset. We will make sure your question is forwarded to our panelists today, and I'm sure they will give you a written answer. Secondly, we have a couple more minutes, so I'm just, while you're filling in the questionnaire, also the survey, we have a couple more questions, which I'm sure you can all help with. Now, Nisha is asking, how do I increase citation of my publication? Do you have any advice for me?
I know Victoria's got a presentation specifically about how to improve your impact and citations. Victoria, do you want to dip into your presentation? Just
I think Rick had his hand up first.
Oh,
no, I think why it's a topic we just recently talked about. I mean, internally, how we can help our author to increase citation. One of the things now, I think social media is getting very popular, even among scientists these days. I mean, Twitter, LinkedIn, all this. I think there is also one of the channels that you can try to help to improve the exposure of your articles. And also, I think another thing is you should also engage the publisher. I always urge, if I publish something, I want to engage the publisher. Are they going to do anything about it? Are they going to promote it? If we get that kind of question, definitely as a publisher, we will do something about it. I mean, as simple as that. Yeah. So your network is important, and how you do it yourself is also important. So bear in mind, of course, I mean, if you have colleagues in the same field, definitely you make sure you let them read your article so that they know about it. I mean, that is by default, I would imagine you should do it. But in social media, that means it's much wider audience. Then it's another venue that you can try out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add on to that. I mean, we've got a lot of resources to look into about how to promote your work, but there are simple things like in your email that you send out hundreds of emails, underneath your signature, just say recent publications and have the hyperlink there so that people can easily access it, because you're likely going to be contacting people that, you're doing research with, or, are interested in that kind of thing. And then just, in terms of contacting the publisher, I agree, the publisher is a resource. And oftentimes publishers will help you with press releases, and there's tons of guidance on what makes an article relevant for a press release. And the one thing is timing, because if you've got an article that is going to be very interesting to the general public, and there's a lot of different measures that you could look at. Again, you can go look at our website. We've got actually guidelines for that type of thing. You need to have an embargo period so journalists can actually read the article before everyone else does. So there's a lot of guidance there that can be a great way to get your research out there. Link to social media, think about creating YouTube channels with your institution where you can be, kind of constantly sharing work. There's some really great examples out there. We're a very visual society, becoming increasingly so. So if you have the resources to do something like that, again, it's just lifting up what's going on at your institution and your own work and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, networks, conferences, all that type of thing. As you said earlier, Rick, the more friends you have, the better. You expand those networks.
Yes, thank you so much. And as you said, social media really is your friend nowadays. And if I'm not mistaken, there is an event on the 11th of April, which we're advertising on the Euraxis ASEAN Facebook page on how to effectively promote your research through social media. So just have a look at our website. And you'll find the link to that particular webinar on there too. I think we are coming to the end of today's session, and we've really had a lot of incredible input today. And we've seen there's a lot of interest also in the growing role of AI in you writing your papers, in the publishers assessing, is it original, is it not? I've seen Victoria has already shared in the chat box, specifically for Taylor and Francis, how Taylor and Francis deals with citations, for example, how much, to what extent you can use AI in rewriting your particular research and how you can cite it, etc. I'm sure Rick will share the same with us for specifically towards scientific publishing. So I know that a lot of you have asked these very specific questions. We will send this to all of you so you can look it up and you have the specific information on how you deal with AI related to your publishing journal. I think we've come to the end of this. There is still some time for you to answer the poll. A lot of you are saying they cannot submit their poll input. I'm not sure whether our colleagues from NSTDA, from NASDAQ, can do something about this. So I hope you have the opportunity. But at this point, while you're still doing this, I'd like to thank all of you. Rick, Barry, Victoria, it was fantastic as always. You will all receive the slides. The recording of the session will be on the NASDAQ YouTube channel. And as I said, we are, as Euraxis ASEAN, also provide a lot of training related to publishing, etc. We will make sure the questions that were not answered in the session today will be looked at by the panelists and you will receive an answer. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. And I'll hand back to our NASDAQ colleagues to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. And thank you very much for all the speakers. This is very great and very informative, with very easy to understand. This is what the aim of our program, that make it easy for everyone to understand and hope that they can apply to their research career. Thank you very much. And this is for our next session. Will be on next Wednesday in the afternoon. Please stay tuned for the proposal writing for international funding. Yeah, and have to say thank you and goodbye. See you again next time.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Thank
See
you.
you soon.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
And
Bye.
good luck in your research journey.
Mhm.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
You can find us on LinkedIn, by the way. Anyone out there? Just Google us, find us on LinkedIn. We can establish that network.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. See you soon,
So,
Victoria.
Barry, when are
Bye-bye.
you coming back?
Bye-bye.
I'm in
Pap.
for
Salamat.
another week or so.
Okay, let's catch up
Okay.
when you're back.
Very good.
Bye.
Okay. Cheer, everybody.
Cheers.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for speakers.
All our friends at NFTDA, thank you for setting this up. Really appreciate it. Great work. Thank
Bye.
Thank you in
Bye.
advance, everyone.
you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. For those who cannot submit the poll, please no worry. We will email you after we finish the section, and maybe it's error from the system. So we can, email to you, and the record of this section and the presentation matter will share you at the link. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.